Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the October 2025 Sustaining Belonging webinars on cultivating inclusive residential colleges. I'm Alan Linton. I'm Senior Director of Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion here at the Associated Colleges of the Midwest, and we're really excited that you're joining us for another timely and relevant conversation about how do we support our students. Just some housekeeping notes at the beginning. This will be an interactive space, so please feel free to use the chat. If you have any questions about the presentation, there'll be time at the end for a Q&A, but also we'll be looking at and monitoring the chat, so please feel free to put your questions there. If you have any technical difficulties, I will do my best to fix them virtually. You can send me a private message, and I'm happy to take care of that. Otherwise, we're really excited that you're joining us for this conversation, and I'm pleased to turn it over to not just a fantastic leader on one of our campuses, but someone that I've enjoyed talking to offline about any range of issues involving not just students, but some exciting on the field action as well. Shammah Bermudez at Macalester College is here to lead us on how we can be better at supporting our neurodivergent students at small private colleges. Turn it over to you.
Thanks, Alan. I appreciate it. I'm really excited to be here. It's a great conversation. I see a bunch of people. I see some of the people in from my own institution, so I'm excited about that. We're going to talk about supporting neurodivergent students and neurodiversity today, specifically at small private colleges. Just want to start here and give you a little bit of background about myself. I am currently the Director of Disability Resources at Macalester College. I'm also the ADA 504 coordinator. About 15 years, more than 15 years of experience working in student affairs, mainly in disability resources, but also in student success retention. I'm part of our on-call response team. I've worked in student conduct, care team, and a number of other areas. I also have had, and aside from working in small private liberal arts colleges, I've worked in a law school setting and community college setting, and I have my doctorate from Widener University in Pennsylvania in higher education. So I want to start today. Before I start, I want to kind of understand just who's in the room. So I'm going to ask Alan, we have a poll set up. If you could just let me know what area of the college you work in, whether it's academic affairs, student affairs, disability resources. That kind of helps understand who the audience is, and really makes for a great conversation. So look at that. Okay. Starting to come in. Some academic affairs folks, student affairs folks, faculty, and others. Okay. No disability resources folks yet. That's okay. So really looking at the goals for today, there's three main goals. One is to gain a better understanding of what neurodiversity is. It's really a large conversation on many of our college campuses, and that's continuing to grow that conversation. Looking at looking to identify barriers to inclusion, and talk about some tangible takeaways and strategies for success. Looking before we jump into things, I just want to kind of ground us in three areas. One is that's identity, language, and models of understanding. It's really important when we talk about language, when we're talking about a topic like this, that language and identity play a huge factor in this. Both are really powerful in our students and in ourselves and the work we do. And I want to just kind of emphasize everyone identifies differently. Not everybody with a disability identifies as somebody with a disability as part of their primary identity. There's intersectionality. There's lots of reasons why students may or may not have disability as part of their primary identity. So I always start the conversation with not assuming that a student's disability is part of their primary identity. There are cultural factors, social factors. Some families, I work with students who have told me that like when they're home, disability is really not a conversation that they have with their family, but when they come to campus, it's very much part of their identity. So I would say don't assume, defer to the individual with the disability. They'll lead you, they'll tell you, they'll indicate how they identify, and just providing grace and patience that that identity may be fluid. Um, Also want to talk about language, person versus identity and disability first language. Um, some of you may or may not be familiar with these terms. Person first is where you put the individual before the disability. So for example, I am a person with a hearing loss. I am a person who uses a wheelchair. I am a person, I have autism, versus identity first and disability first language, which is I am autistic, I am deaf. These, again, really up to the individual. I've been doing this a long time and have had a lot of conversations. Really, what it comes down to is, the individual. So there are people that are both very passionate about this and really, really intentional about either side of this. Even within disability groups, there are differences. So, for example, in the deaf or hard of hearing community, there is very much a divided opinion about this. So going back to deferring to the individual, I, as a personal practice, start with the person first language until the student tells me otherwise. But really looking at that student and kind of they'll guide you in how they use the language, how they identify. And finally, disability. We like to say on our campus, disability is not a bad word. You see, individuals or even schools or colleges will kind of look to um, they kind of dance around the word disability, and how they use it, or sometimes how they name offices. And we've had a lot of conversations on our campus. A couple years ago, I changed our name from the Center for Disability from Disability Services to the Center for Disability Resources. And one of the reasons what was really important in our conversation is that we kept the word disability. One of the reasons being is that a lot of the conversations I had with students, they've talked about how disability is part of their identity. It's part of they have a community on campus, they have a space on campus, and by taking the word disability out of it, it would signal that something is wrong with them or something is to be fixed. And I think that is really important when you setting culture on campus about your expectations are and how you welcome students. So every campus does that different, but just we try and share that disability is not a bad word, especially for many students with disabilities. So the next thing I want to talk about is maybe how we understand neurodiversity, how we understand disability. Historically, there's different models, and historically, much of this was viewed through the medical model, disability, and before neurodiversity, and then with neurodiversity at the beginning, it was largely looked at through a medical model. And the medical model looks at deficits. They focus on impairments. They focus on a a diagnosis that sits within the individual. Kind of the idea of bad brain, good brain, but something to be fixed, something to be treated. And it is very much an outdated model. We've, as a society, shifted largely to a social model, which really emerged in the 1990s and looks at the relationship between the individual and the environment. In other words, the barriers exist within society, not the individual. If you think about your campuses and walking around the campuses, the most obvious, the most obvious example oftentimes are curb cuts. And we'll talk more as we get into the presentation about different ways to identify barriers and to remove barriers. But probably the most, common example I see when I talk about social models are the curb cuts, right? If we put them in wherever we have on campus, it removes that barrier, and that really creates an inclusive campus. So it's a social model. It's the barrier lying within society and their responsibility to move it. The next model also is brought from Brenner's model. Really, this model looks at the sociological impact, the ecological impact of on the student. And so when students come to us, how they develop, how they show up, influence behavior, their access and level of education, it shapes the students who are coming to our campus. Goes from the individual to the interpersonal, organizational, community, and then public policy. So, for example, the individual, our friends, mentors, colleagues, that goes back to what I was saying earlier about how familial influence, why students who tell me, their identity is driven by their culture, their family culture. That really is individual. But then the interpersonal is the classrooms, the halls, the teams, the clubs, the departments, and then the organizational, what campus committees do we have, task forces, how we set up our campus division. Um, and then the public policy really is our policies, our strategic plan, our laws, our mission, our values. All of these play into a student's development, a student's identity, a student's impact. For some students, going back through high school, going back through K through 12, I've had students who didn't have accommodations, very much came to us with a disability, with a diagnosis, and told me that when they were in high school, they were told, well, your grades are fine. You don't need any support. You don't need accommodations. And we're not able to get the support they needed or the access they needed. And really, that comes down to the policies and the procedures of that institute, of that high school or that school district, and looking at that. So understanding that the socio ecological models and in the impact on the individual, and when our students are showing up, all these factors come into play, and how they show up in your office, how they reach out, how they interact on campus, how they socialize. Talking about neurodiversity on campus is, we're seeing an increase, obviously. When I started early on in the field, we had about 9% of students, undergraduate students, who identified, between 9 and 11% of students identify as having a disability. And that's grown now to 20 to 30%. When it comes to students who identify as neurodiverse, it's really hard because we don't have a lot of research on it, but the research we do have is about 10 to 30% of students identify as being neurodiverse in higher education. What makes it challenging is, one, there's just not a lot of research out there. Two, students, how they interpret neurodiverse, how they identify, where they identify, is varies, right? And I think for some students, they will come right, at the beginning, they reach out to the offices, they know the language, they know what to say, they understand their disability, or they understand their identity. Other students are coming from an environment where they may have had family and support systems in place that kind of did all that for them. So they may not identify, or know how to identify, or know how to talk about, what their identity is on college campuses. So they may not identify. And then not all students who identify as neurodiverse seek formal accommodations or identify as having a disability. I have students on campus that I'll get a call from a faculty member or staff member saying, "Oh, this student, they have to come talk to your office. I think they have a disability, or they've talked about having a disability." And we have students on our campus that are, want nothing to do with our office, or nothing to do with identifying as a student with a disability, and that's okay. So all these things, it makes it a challenge to understand and really get a good number of good percentage of students that identify as neurodiverse. What we do know, though, is that that number is growing, and we're seeing more and more students on campus who identify as neurodiverse. So just some background information about what neurodiversity is. It really came out in the 1990s by a sociologist named Judy Singer, as a way to understand autism. And neurodiversity is the idea that people experience and interact with the world around them in many different ways, including learning, processing information, and responding to the environment around them. It's also a way that differences are not viewed as a deficit. Again, moving away from that medical model and not focusing on deficits. I really like this image. It really kind of looks at how neurodiversity has developed over the years. It started out as that very narrow focus on autism, and now has really turned into an umbrella term for a lot of different other diagnoses. Just a way that our brains work differently, we process information differently. So now, it includes ADHD, includes developmental coordination disorder, dyslexia, intellectual disability, developmental language. And these are just a few. There are others that are not on here that are being added every day, but this really gives you an image of what the concept of neurodiversity and how it's really an umbrella for other diagnoses. Couple of terms that are related that you may hear. Neurominority is really a distinct group or group of individuals who diverge from the social norm. Neurodivergent, having a related to a type of brain that is often considered as different from a socially constructed or defined norm. And neurotypical, a group that thinks, moves, hears, sees, and understands and processes information which meets social cultural norms. So really, we're looking at constructed social norms and where somebody lies on that spectrum, and looking at what is neurotypical, what is neurodivergent. Talking about some barriers to success, and these are just general barriers when it comes to neurodiversity. Um, One of the biggest barriers that I see is that transition from K through 12 to college. We're in a system for 12 years, an educational system for 12 years, and then in 3 months, we jump to a completely different system with different languages, different rules, different laws, different structures. And like I mentioned earlier, for some students, they are really good at advocating. They have an understanding of their identity, their disability, their how they identify. Um, they've been a part of and engaged in part of the support systems in high school or K through 12, in IEP meetings. They understand language. They've done the outreach and looked at what offices on campus to reach out to. For other students, they don't have that options, or they don't have that understanding, and they show up on campus, get integrated right into campus life, and then end up showing up right as after class starting. They're starting to struggle, they're starting to run into issues, or they'll show up in class and talk to their professor about how they had an IEP in high school. And so really making sure that K through 12 and college transition, we're aware of that, and we're aware that it's a very different model, from high school, and helping students along with that. We have a great partnership with our admissions team. So we do a lot of work on the front end in the admissions process and education, to help our admissions counselors have those conversations at the college fairs with guidance counselors, with the high schools, with prospective students, and that's really, really helped. The other thing is sensory overload, just coming to college in general, between orientation, between first weeks of classes, between managing and navigating everything that comes with college. That can be a lot of information, just a fire hose, and it's really sensory overload. Whether it's navigating the dining hall, whether it's understanding and trying to figure out where college is, where your class is, who to talk to, navigating social norms, changing schedules, all this information. It's hard enough to be a college student today, and learning how to be a college student, and then taking that and adding in a component of neurodiversity or disability. That can be really overwhelming. And then the other piece of that is if you have students with specific disabilities related, where sensory input is a factor, like students with autism, that can just add another layer where the physical noise or physical environment can impact them greatly. Changes in social environments, rules and language. I've talked about that a little. Everything from the rules of when and how to get to class, who to ask for help, managing how to make friends, the residence halls, the social expectations in the residence halls, what an RA is, what are rules, how to make friends, executive functioning, which are basically the mental, the mental functions, the mental health skills that allow you to understand time management, understand studying skills, how to read your textbooks, how to navigate tests and papers and all those things, initiate studying, initiate creating a schedule and time management. That can be a really big challenge for a student who's neurodiverse and navigating ADHD or different types of disability. Finally, unclear and confusing communications. Everything from a syllabus that is very just basic and vague to a website in a campus office or campus resource office that has their contact information, which is simply like an email and a name of an office, but really doesn't provide it like staff information or provide pictures of staff. So a student may be hesitant to reach out, or if it's too difficult to find out who they have to meet with or how do they ask for help, that can be really, really challenging. So another example would be inside the classroom where group work can often be challenging because roles within the group are unclear and somebody, a student who's neurodiverse may be hesitant to ask or admit that they don't understand or admit that they're having difficulty figuring out who's supposed to do what. So this can be all really challenging. Again, these are just some high level barriers that really impact across the board, and a lot of opportunities to look at these and see how we can um, recognize them and then maybe address them to kind of remove some of those barriers. So I want to stop here. We talked a little bit about what neurodiversity is, some of the barriers. In what campus settings have you observed or heard students share or express their neurodiverse identities? I'm going to ask folks to just take a minute, drop that in the chat. I'm curious to see where you're seeing students pop up on campus. Mhm. Okay. Let's see. Everywhere. Yep. Orientation. Great. Yeah. Student conversations, orientation, health services, resources, office hours, study sessions. Great. Nursing programs. Okay. So we're starting to get some in, and this is exactly kind of what I was hoping for. We're getting to know assignments in first week class, nursing programs, orientation, peer to peer. Um, let's see. Center for Disability Resources, office hours, study sessions. Great. These are, yeah, some really great responses. One of the reasons why I wanted to kind of talk about this question was to highlight the fact that campus really, students with identify as neurodiverse, really, this can come up in all of our settings, uh, all different settings on campus, and moving us away from this traditional focus on academics and just the classroom, but campus resources, campus life, the classroom. If you think about it, somebody mentioned orientation. Orientation, I work really closely with the orientation planning committee. In fact, I'm on it. And we talk about these conversations about how to create space for students who identify as neurodiverse, what that means, how to support students, what happens when the orientation leaders get questions, how they can work with students to support them. Um, Student support offices like disability resources or student employment, these are all areas where students can identify. I think about our colleagues in career exploration. We work closely with them in internships and how to have conversations with employers. And this has come up where students say, how, as a neurodiverse student, how do I ask for accommodations? How do I talk about my identity? So, really, just kind of wanting to move people away from the traditional classroom focus and onto really campus wide and looking at the different elements. And it sounds like a lot of folks have already seen that and experiencing that. So that's really great. So let's talk about some strategies for success. One of the biggest ways to support students who are neurodiverse and support really any students with disabilities across the board is the principles of universal design. Some people may have heard about it. It's really common in the college environment. It's becoming more and more common both inside the classroom and outside the classroom. And really, the 7 principles I have outlined on the slide focus on equitable use, flexibility in use, simple and intuitive, perceivable, tolerance for error, low physical effort, size and space. And really what it comes down to is design things in a way that are usable by all people to the greatest extent possible without the need for adaptation or special design. And for those who are not familiar, universal design came out of the architectural world. Um, Individual named Ron Mace, who really created the principles of universal design. And the idea is just to remove those barriers on the front end in how you design everything, whether it's physical environment like the classroom or the campus, or learning materials, or classroom exercises, or student org events. Really looking at it and designing it in a way that everyone can participate without the need for accommodations or adaptation. So some UDL examples really, uh, closed captioning on all videos. This comes in everything we do, right? Not just classroom, orientation videos, uh, student programs, student events on campus. The videos you have maybe in your office, on your website, welcoming students or showing them how to do something. Provide closed captioning. I have students who don't necessarily have a hearing impairment, or hearing related disability, but have a processing disability and really or ADHD, and find it really helpful where they can read the captions while they're watching the video. So we get a lot of requests for that. So we always make sure that whenever we have an event or whenever we have videos, we provide a closed captioning option or feature. Provide multiple ways to participate in programs. We do events on campus where we have a Zoom option, so we have students can participate through Zoom. With some events that's not always possible, but thinking differently, thinking different ways for students to participate in these programs. Normalize using the microphone. This is a really big one, and I can't say this enough. This is not about whether or not somebody can speak loud. This is not whether or not you have any students who are deaf or hard of hearing. Microphones make it accessible for a lot of reasons, especially individuals who have ADHD or processing disorders, because when you're in an event, somebody with a processing disorder, ADHD, is spending so much energy trying to focus on what the individual is saying, and this can be impacted by white noise, white distance, the acoustics in the room, that they're so focused on hearing you, they're not able to kind of capture the information that you're talking about, and may lose a lot of the content. So it can be really challenging. One of the things that we've done in our student affairs division, we have student affairs division meetings every month with about 100 or so staff, and we've normalized from the VP down using microphones. We have several microphones set up throughout the room, and we ask anybody who's talking to use the microphone, and it's really been a cultural shift. And then we're working on this, across campus, and it's starting to pick up, which is really nice. Working with IT to make sure that the technology and the equipment is already available in a lot of these rooms and the spaces. So it brings down the barriers of having to try and find the equipment. If you forget to do it, it's already there. That really encourages universal design. Sensory-free spaces during campus events. This is a big one. If we think about some of the campus events that we run here on campus, we have Spring Fest, we have one event that's coming up. It's called Winter Ball, and so we work with the student government to create a room or space where students who get overwhelmed easily can just step off into another room, which is quiet, which is sensory free, allows them to take a break. And you can do this in a lot of different ways, a lot of different events. Finally, multiple teaching methods. Everybody learns differently. Everybody processes information differently. By providing students with individual ways, whether it's a program that you're doing within your department, whether it's an academic, like a classroom or an academic program, providing multiple ways for students to learn, not just lecture, but maybe some ancillary videos or resources or different interactive options. That really goes a long way in students addressing addressing everybody's all the different learning styles that students may have, and addressing the different barriers that may exist because of a learning disability, because of ADHD, because of the impact of neurodiversity. It really opens up and provides that inclusion and removes those barriers. Let's jump to maybe some campus resources and departments. Thinking about the different offices on campus. When students, what does it take, one, for a student to come ask for help or access your office? And how do they come in? What are they saying? So our office, we support about 700 students on campus, and we have students who will email us, who will stop in, who will get referred, who will come down with a friend. Um, but there's lots of different ways to make your department really welcoming for neurodiverse students. One is to listen and allow students to drive their identity. Remember earlier I was talking about how students may or may not understand their identity fully. They may or may not know the language to use, and they may or may not know when they say neurodiverse, what does that mean for that individual? So a lot of times I'll meet with a student and they'll identify as neurodiverse, and I'll ask them, so help me understand how that impacts you and how that impacts your learning. What are some of your experiences in the classroom, outside the classroom, and really help guide them through that conversation. Utilizing the department website to provide key information is huge. We really have redid our website to provide as much information as possible, everything from our processes to resources for students to faculty, to our staff profile and information. So all our staff's pictures are up on our website. We have their contact information, so students can go in, they can see who we are, they know what we look like, they can contact us. But also when we meet with them, I meet with a student, have a conversation, and then they leave and they may be able to they forget what we talked about, or they have another question. They can go to our website and look through all the information. They can also really helps prepare them for our meeting. They can look at it ahead of time and know some of the information, know some of the questions that they want to ask. It allows them to prepare for a meeting. And I have a lot of students who identify as neurodiverse who, when they're either meeting with an office, meeting with a professor, they want to get that information ahead of time so they can prepare, so they can process, so they can practice maybe asking questions, so they can process the information, so they can think through some of the scenarios. Really helps them prep for that meeting. Um, Offer different settings for student meetings. I love when students come, and I highly encourage students. I want to meet with them in person, but there are sometimes students, because of severe anxiety, because of different types of impacts of their disability, an in-person meeting can be really can be really anxiety driven, really a barrier. So we offer students to meet over Zoom. Or sometimes they'll say, hey, can we go for a walk and walking around campus and talk? Absolutely. Really trying to provide those different settings. In the office, looking at different setups. All of our offices have adjustable lighting, different types of seating. It's really creating a comfortable environment. I have students who come in and ask, if we could turn down the lights. They want to sit in certain chairs. We move certain chairs around. They have options, so it really makes it comfortable and welcoming. And then providing post-meeting summary email. This is something I do with all students. I let them know. And a lot of times you see this relief on their face because they're meeting with me and they're trying to remember everything, trying to write everything down, and they're worried about missing something or not understanding something. So what I do is I just say, hey, don't worry, we're gonna put this all in an email. I'll send it to you after we meet. And I just spread a summary of what we talked about, provide links, provide information, maybe talk about some action steps and set some follow-up dates. And it really just outlines everything for the student. This way they can go back, they can look at that email, they can have it in writing, and they don't have to worry about forgetting something. And I find that students are just that much more engaged in our meetings and in our interactions, and they're more likely to be able to share information and process information and think through what they want to talk about. So really providing them with that post-meeting summary email is a huge help. Jump into the classroom setting. There's a lot of, we talked about universal design earlier, but some of these things and these things also extend to the office, if they're coming to meet you as well. But in the classroom, welcoming sensory supports in classrooms. We give out fidgets to every student on campus. We have students will come with all sorts of fidgets, and not just in the traditional side, sense. We have our fidgets that we give away, but then there's also things like students wanting to take, color or doodle when they're in the classroom. We have students who knit while they're in the classroom as a way to, as a way to help them focus. And then noise canceling headphones. We allow students who will want to have one earbud in or having their noise canceling headphones because it really cuts out a lot of the extra white noise or distractions and helps them focus on what they're learning or what the professor's saying. So we actually provide that as an accommodation. And then we'll work with the faculty to kind of make sure they understand what that accommodation is, not just what it is, but why and how it's helping the student engage in that classroom. We also provide students during testing with noise canceling headphones. We have students who have music combinations where we have devices. They're basically MP3 players that they can download their music list to and listen to music. When we check them, we listen to the music list first. Our testing coordinators will listen to that music list first to make sure, obviously, they're not loading any academic content or test content on there, but it really kind of helps them. It helps them with the sensory support. Normalizing assistive technology. One of the big things we talk about on a lot of college campuses is note-taking assistance. Peer note-taking has really transitioned from the traditional peer note-taker to using assistive technology and audio note-taking software. One of the softwares that we use is now called Genio. It records the lectures and it creates transcripts, and then it allows the student to listen to the recording as much as they want to, but it doesn't allow them to share it or download it. So they can't share it with their friends. They can't, it's literally in a profile that they can only access. That actually puts professors' minds at ease, really, really significantly. And what I tell faculty is, this is an opportunity. This student is oftentimes a student who they can take notes or they can listen to the professor, but they can't do both at the same time. So they're missing out on engaging the classroom or engaging with the professor and missing the content. This allows them to really engage. They may still take notes, but they're engaging, and whatever they know, whatever they miss is being captured. So it really removes that barrier. It provides an opportunity for them to really be interactive and engaging in class and really capture that content, and lowers the anxiety level significantly. Clear instructions, uh, creating an inclusive syllabus that includes, test dates, that includes a statement of welcoming students to talk to them about their academic accommodations, providing as much information as possible on the front end. And I recognize the challenges sometimes syllabi have grown significantly since I was in college, and now some are pretty robust. And there's a slippery slope to what you can put in a syllabus, but overall, the more information you can provide as far as classroom structure, assignments, tests, um, contact information, location, all that stuff, that really helps that individual, a student who's neurodiverse, really navigate that information and have that information and be able to play through what that class is going to look like, what they need to do, be successful, how to ask for help, how to communicate with the professors. Also, specific roles or tasks for group work. I mentioned earlier that that can be really confusing. You have a group assignment and they're not really sure who does what, and a student may be anxious or not want to admit that they missed information because they didn't process that information and now are hesitant to ask for help. So being able to maybe talk through with students what specific roles students have, or what roles that they need to identify, and then how the students pick those roles is really, really helpful. Finally, integrating universal design for learning. We talked about what universal design is, but there's also universal design for learning. And it works mainly, obviously, it's designed for the classroom, but it really works across college campuses, across the campus environment as well, in a lot of other areas. So here's an example of what universal design for learning is. And it really comes down to three areas: engagement, representation, and action and expression. The why of learning, the what of learning, and the how of learning. Understanding how to break this down and look at it when you are creating assignments, you're looking at what, an upcoming section or chapter or exam or project, really breaking down how you want the students to engage, how can they understand that content, how can they decide what they're learning, and then how can they just demonstrate their knowledge and expressing communication, whether it's exams, whether it's papers, whether it's presentation, whether it's class project. Looking at all those, and a different way to break this down is thinking how learners will engage with the lessons. Do they regulate their own learning, sustain motivation, engage interest of all learners? Think about how information is presented to learners. Is it lecture style? Is it videos? Is it choose your own adventure? Some professors, some classes allow students to say, here's the content. There are 4 different ways that you can engage with this materials. You choose how you want to learn. You can choose how you want to engage with the materials. And then how do you demonstrate the knowledge or express themselves what they've learned? Is it taking a traditional test, an assessment? Is it doing a PowerPoint presentation? Do you provide options for students to, hey, pick one of these 3 options. You can take a test, you can do a presentation, you can create a video, or do a group project. I had a student who was significantly um, challenged in the ability to do a class presentation for everyone. The anxiety got so severe that it would just freeze and panic. And they also, they would also have difficulty expressing themselves, difficulty picking up social cues. So one of the things we did was we worked with a professor. They created this phenomenal presentation, and then they provide voiceover and narrate the presentation. And it turned out to be a really amazing presentation. In fact, the faculty member then took that idea and actually made it an assignment for future classes where students had to create a PowerPoint and provide a voiceover to narrate their presentation. It worked out really, really well. That student ended up being highly successful in that course. And it was just an example of a different way to demonstrate knowledge and express themselves. So we talked about this earlier, and I think, from the survey, a lot of folks had kind of pointed out different areas. But really going back to this and emphasizing that students are neurodiverse, they can identify, and this can show up in many different spaces and many different areas. Residence life, dining, student orgs, facilities, orientation, major events, and commencement. So it really is campus wide. And there's also a lot of opportunities to look at and identify barriers in each of these areas. So some strategies for campus life. Residence life, provide housing selection information in a variety of different formats. Every year, a lot of college campuses, they have housing selection process through residence life. That can be stressful enough trying to pick out your room, but somebody who's neurodiverse, that's added pressure about timeliness, picking a room under a timed system. Do they have all the information? What if they have questions? So one of the things that we did with our campus is we partnered with Residential Life, and we created a couple of pop-in sessions for students, specifically for students who are neurodiverse or students with disabilities, to come meet with us, come talk to Residence Life and Housing with disability resources, and ask questions, find out the information. And it actually ended up working out really well, and students felt really supported because they had that opportunity to ask questions, to go through it and understand the processes, and how the accommodation process works for housing selection. So that was really successful. Dining halls, that's another big area campus where we often see students who have sensory related disabilities or can get overwhelmed with focus and attention, can be a real barrier. And then what ends up happening is students end up not eating in the dining hall or avoiding the dining hall, and either going to get their own food. So now they're on a meal plan, but they're not using it, and they're spending more money because they don't want to go in the dining hall. So on our campus, we have a meal plan pre-order system where you can actually submit a form to our dining staff the night before. You can pick a meal based off the menus for the week, and this also works for students who have dietary restrictions, because we have dietary restrictions built in there. We also have students who are sick or have to be quarantined because of maybe COVID or something like that. They can use this as well, and then they can pick it up. We also have we also have a system where students can take out a plastic to go container where they can go around, pick up their food, and then take it outside, take it someplace else. We really want to integrate students into the dining hall experience and want them to be able to eat with their friends. So I have a lot of students, we use the pre-order plan, go and pick up their meal, and then go over and hang out with their friends at the table and eat with their friends. But it takes away that barrier of having to try and navigate a dining hall when there's 1,200 students all converging once into a dining hall area. Student organizations, I work really closely with our student leaders, and I have a training next week where I'm providing training about how to plan event planning in an accessible manner, how to create accessible events. So we work with our Student Government Association, we work with our student leaders, and we provide them a platform and a framework so they can think through, where is the space? Is this space accessible? What does that mean? How to advertise in an inclusive and accessible way, how to create accessible electronic digital materials. All this, in a training, it leads to removing those barriers to access and helping become more inclusive for neurodiverse students. Large student events, we talked about that earlier. The example of fall ball and creating identity, sensory-free, quiet spaces. And this could be anywhere. It could be in a room next door. It could be downstairs. It could be one section of the hall. But just thinking through that and making sure that space is available. commencement, opportunities for graduation practice in smaller settings. We have graduation practice or commencement practice the day before, where we have all the students come through and walk through the process. But what we do is we have an option for students to request accommodations or contact our office if they need accommodations for graduation, and then as well as graduation practice. So students who have this, need an accommodation, what we can do is we meet with them probably about 45 minutes before graduation practice starts, and we allow them to, we walk through it with them. And then they're welcome to participate in the graduation practice, obviously, but it just gives them an opportunity to actually go through it when you don't have 500 students all coming through. And it just allows them for more processing, more time to process information, acquire environment. It really makes a huge difference. And finally, create and support identity collectives on campus. We have several identity collectives on campus. We have some that are just broad disability focused. We have one, we have a student or Voices of Mental Health, and we have some other identity collectives on campus. And these are student driven, they're supported by the college, but they really create more of a space and more community for those students who may not have community, elsewhere. Some students have community, they may be student athlete, they may be involved in a number of different student orgs, but they're looking for community with other students who with similar identities. So that's been really amazing and helpful. We work closely with our Center for Social Justice, and they've been a really great partner in helping us create those. So we also have actually identity collectives now for staff who identifies having disability, and so that's been really welcoming for staff as well. So finally, some tangible takeaways. I'm gonna, go through this and then we'll open up some questions, but provide ongoing awareness and education campus wide. So this is a really big opportunity. Work with the folks in disability resources. I go around campus, I work closely with our campus partners, and I provide workshops with our faculty, workshops within both large faculty settings and then individual departments. And that's important because every academic department has a different need or different setting. So really trying to understand what the needs of individual departments is really helpful, really important to them too. And then looking at, staff across different departments, our campus partners, admissions, dining hall, facilities, any number of different areas, working to help understand how every department can play a role in this and just creating that awareness and education. We talked about creating inclusive, welcoming office spaces with flexible settings. That has been really makes a huge impact when you can adjust lighting, furniture, have flexibility in space, really create that comforting and welcoming environment. Like I said earlier, listen to the student and let them drive the identity conversation. Let them get comfortable. A lot of students I work with, especially students with complex disabilities, have had a long history of navigating people who were supposed to help them and systems that were supposed to help them, but systems that were broken. So they've been let down or their trust has been broken. So it may take time to build trust. And the best way to do that is to listen and provide that safe space for them. And then going into looking at opportunities to create that student space. So identity collectives, student organizations. One of the things that we did last semester was we created a body doubling work group for our students. And it's student driven and it's in our space, 5 to 7, 2 nights a week. We have our student mentors come down, hang out, open the space, and other students just come in and study. And it's been great. It's been really well received. And we try to emphasize that it's the student space. Let's let them drive what makes it comfortable. We provide food sometimes, or different resources, and it's been really, really popular. The other The other thing is when we have students, we have something on, in the news that happened, or students want to talk about that. This week we've had, since there's been a lot of conversation, unfortunately, about um, misinformation about autism in the national news, we've had a lot of students are feeling like they want to come together. So I worked with a handful of students to create a community space that they came down and they could talk through everything that's going on and process it. So we had students hang out in our space last night. We provide food and just conversation. We partner with the counseling center in case students want to, work with them to process the information at different levels. So it really was a great opportunity there. Finally, normalizing the integration of universal design into your policies, into your practices, into your culture, looking at it through the universal design lens and the universal design for learning lens really, really makes a difference. So I encourage everyone, as you have the opportunity to pick a policy, pick a process, and look at it and say, is the information inclusive? Is it welcoming? Um, are there any barriers to this? How does this possibly play out with, actually working? It may sound good, but does it actually play out for students in a way that reduces those barriers and is really practical? We also often work with, it's an end user approach. So I will reach out and work with a handful of students when I'm writing a policy and say, hey, I'm writing this new process or policy. Can you guys take a look at it? Tell me what your thoughts are. How does this help? What do you see from a student perspective? What would make this easy? What would make this work? And are there any red flags? And it really helps and goes a long way in making sure that your policies and practices and culture are inclusive and helpful. Okay, so I know I talked a whole lot. What questions about do folks in the office in the chat have? What comes to mind? Are there things that I didn't talk about that you want to learn more about?